Hi guys, so this is going to be the in-depth demonstration of the sample and hold oscillator. So I'm just going to take you step by step through the controls. And so if you can follow along with the lab report while you're doing this, it'll probably give you a little bit more in-depth explanation of how it's supposed to sound in each section rather than just looking at schematics. Okay, so let's start with the actual sample and hold. So what's happening is I have an input signal going in the audio in, and that's what's going into the drain side of my MOSFET. So if you look at the schematic I gave on the lab report, there's a drain and a source and a gate to every MOSFET. That's a field effect transistor. Basically, you can think of it as a really automatic switch. So what I want is some kind of, I guess you could say it could be an audio signal going into the gate of the MOSFET. So what I have going in there is a square wave. So let me just give you the hypothetical, which is kind of how this is working. What's going in to the MOSFET right now is on the drain side, noise. On the gate side, there's a square wave. And on the source side, which is my output, we have the output of the sample and hold, which I'll explain in a minute. So basically what happens is you have some difference in voltage between the source and the gate, and that determines the conductivity between the drain and the source, basically the input and the output. So what I've got happening is I've got a square pulse wave going to the gate, and what happens is when I make that square pulse wave so that it's a low frequency and then a quick pulse, every time that quick pulse happens, it opens up the drain and the source and lets voltage from my input, my noise, move through. So why that's significant is because what I have after my MOSFET is a capacitor. And what's happening in the sample and hold is the capacitor is basically charging up when the switch is closed and when that circuit's complete, and then it discharges as soon as that switch closes. So because of the nature of my square pulse, it pretty much is charging really quick, discharging, charging, discharging, and that's what gives us the sample and hold. So every time it charges, it samples a voltage from my input source and holds that, sends it to my output. Now, what that means is it's basically sampling a voltage that I can now use after my sample and hold. So think about it this way. If I put in noise is random, right? I can sample that, let's say I'm sampling it like 10 times per second, right? Every time I sample that, it's theoretically a random voltage that I can now use somewhere else, right? So sometimes that voltage is going to be positive, sometimes that voltage is going to be negative, right? So really my output ends up looking like, when noise is my input, a bunch of random positive or negative voltages that I can now use somewhere else. Okay, so why that's significant is because I've set up this sample and hold with two oscillators. These two oscillators are doing the same thing. Basically what matters is how they're affecting the output of the sound. So anyway, those outputted voltages from the sample and hold are going to LEDs. And what I've done is I've put them in like an LED network so that they're forward and reverse bias. The forward bias ones will pick up the positive voltages that come out of that sample and hold, and the negative voltages are picked up by the reverse bias ones. So anytime one LED is on, the other LED is off. So I have two of those going at the same time. I'm going to go ahead and show you this really quick. You can see inside there. The blue is are the negative voltages, and the red are the positive voltages. So you see how that's kind of like randomly turning on and off. That's it picking up the voltages from the output of the sample and hold. Okay, so how are we going to use this? Because it's kind of chaos right now, you could say. So what I'm going to do is take you through how to control the frequency of the square wave, and then I'm going to take you through how to control the oscillators and actually make some music. Okay, so let's start with the pulse speed and pulse frequency controls on our top right of the box. So as I mentioned before, that's the square wave that's controlling the control gate of the MOSFET. So basically, think about it this way. My pulse width is how big that pulse where the switch samples, basically. So when the MOSFET samples and then it turns right off when that pulse is done. So if I make that pulse super duper duper fast, you can barely even hear it. See, you can't even hear the noise. Okay. Then if I make the pulse frequency super, super, super often, see how it's kind of more of a blurred sound? Here, I'll turn it up a little bit. It's more blurred. I can make it really slow. It's changing a lot more slowly. It's more of a coherent tone. Here. Okay. And then we can move into the oscillator section now that makes sense. Okay, so oscillator 1 and 2 are both doing the same things, and they each have a couple controls. So as you saw when I showed you the inside of the box, I have the outputs from those LEDs lined up next to photoresistors, which are basically giving me some control over the pitch of each oscillator. So those are, not the pitch, the frequency. So those are going to control the frequency of each oscillator. I've also got, right after both of those photoresistors, I've got potentiometers that give me control over pitch. So if I turn one of these pitch oscillators, or potentiometers, listen to this. See? Just gives me a little bit more control over pitch than I had before. Right? And then I have a crossfader between the oscillator types. So the oscillators I built are square / triangle oscillators. So I basically have both those outputs going to potentiometers that let me fade between those. So I'll do it completely on one side. See how I can change that oscillator type without changing the pitch? Or I can do both at the same time. And that's just one side. Okay, so, but the cool thing about this is that there's two oscillators, and the way I have it set up is in the middle we have this big crossfader. That's a potentiometer that lets me crossfade between what oscillator I want. So I could go to one side, which I was just now, and just play with that. So like, let's leave it here. So that's going to be my right side alone. Right now, only the LEDs on one side are flashing. Of course, there's a little bleed, and that was that was intentional because I wanted it to be kind of like a trippy psychedelic sound. There's a little bit of bleed, but mostly that right oscillator is going right now. So now let's turn it all the way to the other side. And completely change that. So that's a lot different than what we heard on the other side. So now let's fade to the other side. And now we can fade to the middle. And we can get pretty wild. Right? So, there we go. And right now what I'm doing is I'm just adding a little bit of extra light in there to turn up those frequencies so that you can hear them a little better. But usually it's like a super sub, so just take a listen to this. It's kind of hard to hear. But if you add a little more. The more light you have, the higher those frequencies are going to be. So that's why I put it in the box, so you can open it a little bit and have more more higher frequencies, and you can leave it closed and let it go into like super sub mode. So yeah, that's pretty much it. A lot of the technical stuff is in the blog, but this gives you a little insight into how it actually sounds when those things are happening. That's the end.